the next presentation is going to be a tag team of US and Russian presenters. So first, it's going to be Dr. Amy Merten from the NOAA Office of Response and Restoration. And she's going to pass the baton to Dr. Alexey Knizhnikov, head of oil and gas program at the WWF Russia. And they're both going to address Arctic environmental response and management. Since it's a joint sort of presentation, it's going to be 30 minutes minus whatever time they took with his movies. But I'll let them allocate it as needed. So okay. You control the time.
Okay, thanks, Pablo. And I want to thank Pablo and John for inviting me back to speak at this symposium. It's one of my favorite meetings. I think it's great. I was panicking over there watching the polar bear videos and going, oh my God, Pablo, I want to go before David next time, please. So I did think that there are lots of ties to David's talk and what I would like to talk about. The data component, having good data, is essential, and having a good data visualization tool is also imperative for good decision making. So there's a tie there. This picture is actually taken in Svalbard. We're sitting on the polar Cecil, kind of the state of the art in emergency response, ice breaking capabilities, and we're looking for polar bears. So that's my polar bear tie, and I do have a little bit of polar bear data. So I am going to talk about Arctic IRMA, the environmental response management application that I've talked about over the years. We have a big update on how we're using it. And I'll talk about some of our international activities that we've been doing, particularly with Russia, and as we have a pan-Arctic platform common operational picture. And I also thought David did a great job talking about trustee responsibility. So for NOAA, we also support the Coast Guard and provide scientific expertise, modeling, things like IRMA for the emergency response phase, but also to support injury assessment as our responsibility as a trustee. So making sure that we understand the impacts and how we might go back about restoring the impacts from spills. So I know some of you know what IRMA is, but just for those of you that don't, it is a web mapping application that's freely available. Most of the data that we have in there are publicly available, so you can go right there and use it however you'd like. I'll give some examples of how you can use that and download those data sets. Arctic IRMA, or IRMA in general, was created through a partnership with the University of New Hampshire and NOAA. And it really was out of frustration being in a command post and trying to mentally put together things like nautical charts and weather forecasts and current information and trajectory information, and trying to understand where the resources at risk might be and how we might go about assessing them. So it was really about getting data on the same framework so that people could collectively see the same story and make better decisions. So that's how it all started. We were the common operational picture for Deepwater Horizon. Thank you to Admiral Allen for that. We learned a ton in Deepwater Horizon, and a lot of that has been transported back to Arctic IRMA and our other IRMA sites around the country. I will say that Arctic IRMA existed before Deepwater Horizon. It's a myth that came after. We were working on this way before Deepwater Horizon happened. We have evolved quite a bit in terms of IT security, so we're a FISMA medium system accredited, which means that we spend a lot of money on IT security to make sure that we're doing everything we can to meet those requirements. We do have the ability to protect sensitive data, whether it's in the heat of the battle during an emergency response phase, or whether it's proprietary information from communities or from the responsible parties. We learned a lot during Deepwater Horizon about scalability. We would not have been able to operate our response application publicly, so we had to scale up quite a bit. From that, we now sit on the Amazon cloud. We can respond very quickly to big pulses of hits. If there's a hurricane going up the Atlantic coast or into the Gulf of Alaska, we can handle that and then go back down to kind of operational levels of a server footprint. It is a web mapping application, so we're taking advantage of distributed data sets, whether it's real-time information that we're pulling in, we're adding static data sets, et cetera, and I'll give some examples of that. So the big news here, I've been doing Arctic work for quite some time now, and I've always been very frustrated that we were in the Mercator view, the lower 48 centric view of Irma. And I've tried for 7 years to get funding to have polar projections. We were successful getting funding from Bessie. Thank you very much, Bessie. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a tie to the polar projection here as a pan-Arctic common operational picture to support international response, and a Bessie database pulling together all the Arctic response capabilities. That was all part of the Arctic Council's Emergency Prevention, Preparedness, and Response Working Group over the last 2 years that Admiral Bolton talked about previously this morning. So the old version, you can still get the old version if you like. Go up here, click on the globe, and you can you'll be transported into polar projections. You can choose several different polar projections depending on what view you'd like to see for you and your data. So the polar projection point of view, as we know, as we go further north, the data are distorted from a navigational point of view. The distances are just wrong. And then from a communication point of view, for transboundary international discussions, this is the way we like to look at the world when we're talking about Arctic cooperation and emergency response and data sharing. So this, the data set that I'm showing here is, again, the Arctic Response Assets database that Bessie put together. IRMA was a joint project, a pilot project for EPPR, and this is an example of these projects coming together. So this is the first time there's been an Arctic Response Asset database available, and we look forward to using that going forward to having better planning of contingency plans, drills and exercises, and if we ever have to respond, being able to understand where we can get equipment from. And this is just another example in a different polar projection in different base maps in the same data set. So if we start drilling into the data themselves, again, I'm just moving projections so you get a feel for the differences that if you have an Alaska viewpoint, you can have Alaska on the bottom. This is the European viewpoint. And then if this is just getting into the data themselves. So if you're in IRMA, if we're online, kind of a GIS trick, you would right-click on this layer, view the data, and up would pop a table where you can get a lot more information about that skimmer that you've just clicked on. I'm going to highlight 3 different skimmers that I'm interested in understanding more about, and then those will be depicted on the map, and you can start drilling into the data sets that you're interested in. You could also draw a polygon and do your queries that way. And then just another example of being able to dig into the data sets and get more information about this particular skimmer. Is this the one you need? Is this the one you're going to try to get for your incident? So I want to move a little. I'm going to focus on the National Ice Center sea ice data. It's been a staple of our data sets for several years now. This again is in the Mercator viewpoint, flat and distorted, and this is now in the polar projection viewpoint. I do want to say a little bit about data and humans behind data. We have a script where we automatically get the daily ice extent and the daily ice concentrations from the National Ice Center and put them into IRMA seamlessly. If something goes wrong, people call us and say, where are the ice data? And we have the ability to call the National Ice Center and actually have a person pick up the phone, and we can troubleshoot that very quickly. So it's important when we're using these authoritative data sets to be able to actually have some human contact as well. And again, just an example of, this is another shout out to GINA, the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geographic Information Network of Alaska. So they have some of the best imagery available for base mapping in the Arctic. So that's the base map, and then again, the National Ice Center data. And then the other ice data I wanted to highlight, this is actually the multi-sensor analyzed sea ice extent from the National Ice Center and the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And AUS actually takes this data, packages it up in a way that we can ingest it a little bit faster in a standardized way. And so we try to utilize those types of products where we can. The downside of using a web mapping service versus actually taking the data is if you lose that, you're offline. You don't have the ability to download the data and analyze it further, whereas you do if you actually have the shapefile. The other nice thing, if you're a GIS person and mapping, if you are in IRMA and you're ticking through the layers that you are interested in and you want to change projections, if the data set is supported in those projections, it will reproject on the fly. The data sets that you may have selected that don't do that, that are going to stay in Mercator, will just drop off your table of contents. So it is very flexible for switching viewpoints, projections, and data sets. So now I'm going to transition into talking about the work that we're doing with WWF Russia and some of the work we're doing with the Arctic Council. So Alexey will talk more about the workshop that he hosted in Moscow this past April. We were there talking about scientific post-Deepwater Horizon lessons learned. My component of that was obviously IRMA in overall data management for the Deepwater Horizon and transferring that knowledge to our Russian counterparts. We did a significant IRMA training with Russian colleagues. Several of them were GIS experts. And prior to the training, we were able to incorporate some WWF Russian data so people could really start putting some context to talking about what a joint incident might look like and how we might, what the data gaps are and how we might respond jointly. There are discussions ongoing right now about having a joint exercise with the U.S. and Russia in FY18. The U.S. Coast Guard is leading that effort, and we're hoping that IRMA will be a part of that as a data sharing platform. We also will be hosting our Russian counterparts to do some more extensive training later this fall. I just wanted to give you an example of kind of this scenario we were working through. It was Bering Strait, vessel runs into trouble near the Russian shoreline. The blue blob is kind of our standard trajectory output where the oil will be heading, what shorelines might be impacted, and then the yellow dots are some of the seabird colonies on the Russian side. There's some shore zone and environmental sensitivity index mapping on the U.S. side. And then an example of pulling in some of the current information from the Navy HICOM model. So all of the things that we're pulling in from the U.S. side, they're analogs to that on the Russian side, so trying to figure out what we really do need collectively for a response. Here's one more tie to the polar bears. So this is an example of some of the WWF data that were provided to us prior to our training in Moscow. These are just some of the marine mammal distributions, so bowhead whale, walrus, and I thought we had polar bears on here as well, but we do have polar bear information in IRMA, and some of the walrus data you showed are also in IRMA. Nice data sets to be able to overlay with scenario planning, vessel traffic information, fishing information. So it's great data. Now I'm going to move into some of one of the things that I was involved with as the chair of the EPPR working group for the past 2 years. As Ambassador Bolton said today, EPPR is responsible for actually 2 of the legally binding agreements under the Arctic Council. The first one is on oil spill preparedness and response, and the second one is on search and rescue. So there's an extensive after-action report of the whole phases of the exercise design that that we all went through for this tabletop that we had. It was a pretty neat process that the U.S. Coast Guard actually led the coordination effort to design an exercise that basically gave tasks to all of the different countries and permanent participants to fully engage the capabilities of an international response. So the U.S. led the effort. Norway and Russia were having a live exercise in May of 2016. So that was the scenario that we used. It was a loaded tank vessel with a crude vessel that collided with a cargo vessel in the traffic separation zone outside of Vardø, Norway. Overwhelmed the capabilities of both the Norwegian and Russian response capabilities, so they invoked the international agreement and asked for assistance from all of the countries. So each country went through their separate process of identifying capabilities, equipment, people, expertise, and what could be provided to Norway to support the cleanup. And as importantly, what couldn't be provided. So once you start sending your equipment over the border and your people over the border, you've now invalidated some of your contingency plans that you have ready to go for protecting your own shorelines. So it was really a very comprehensive look at all of the national competencies and all the national capabilities, and got together for our tabletop in Montreal in June, and really dug through all of the lessons learned from the respective countries. Collectively, what we learned from how we could share capabilities across borders, and where were those roadblocks. As I mentioned, there's a significant after-action report that was part of the ministerial deliverables. Lieutenant Commander Wes James was the lead on that, and he did a fantastic job. And really, I think we'll be mining that report for years to come. And it really set up a cookbook for how we go about conducting these international exercises every 2 years, which is their requirement. We're also required to update the operational guidelines of that agreement every 2 years. So there's set the bar pretty high, but also put forward a methodology that we've passed on to Finland. So Finland will take on the next international exercise under EPPR. They also established a marine environmental response expert group, and that group is very much charged with implementing the training and the exercising and keeping those operational guidelines up to date going forward. So that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Alexey. Pablo, do you want to ask questions now or save it all to the end? Oh no. Sorry, Alexey.
Let's see how he performs.
Don't think so fast. So, доброе утро means good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and as a member of small Russian delegation, and on behalf of WWF Russia, actually the biggest conservation NGO in Russia. We about 23 years in country, and Arctic is our priority and becoming more and more important for us to achieve our conservation goal from year to year. And actually one of the reasons that extractive industry and adjusted shipping is the key drivers now, key factors for economic development in the Russian Arctic, and at the same time, this industry is the main factor for increased environmental risks. That's why we pay more and more attention for this region. Just general overview what's going on with offshore development for oil and gas in Russia. This is actually the latest version of map of offshore lease area for oil and gas that we just finished months ago before I come here. And in yellow, this is actually there are two major companies, Russian state-owned companies, who have permission from Russian government to develop offshore deposits. Rosneft, this is yellow blocks, and Gazprom, blue blocks. Our estimation that about 35% of exclusive economic zone already under these lease areas. But the good news for us as environmental NGOs that last September our government made a decision at least to postpone to establish, to sell new leases. So we hope that this picture will stay at least for a few years. And another good news that although there are huge areas that already sold for possible exploration and extraction for different reasons, and you know some of the reasons, everything is slowed down in terms of real drilling in Russian Arctic. We have only one existing extraction project. We call it Pechora Sea. This is southeastern part of Barents Sea. And Gazprom have the first extraction rig here. The name is Prirazlomная. And we have some activity from Rosneft now to drill in this shallow Khatanga Bay. And in all other areas, we think now is some postpone and delay in any activities. But what is going on in terms of increased activities, this is shipping. Shipping across Russian Arctic. Sorry, I have only Russian version of this map, but I give you some explanation. It's not. So first of all, we are not forecast any visible increase in transit across our Northern Sea route from Europe to Asia. But what we predicted was already happening, this destinational transportation. So a lot of our resources, mineral resources, already exported by shipping across the Arctic. One of the well-known area, our Taimyr Peninsula, for many, many decades, they sell metals across shipping, Arctic shipping. But now more and more resources start to transport across Arctic. A few oil fields, on-land fields, transport crude oil to Europe using Arctic shipping. This is from Pechora Sea, currently from Yamal Peninsula. Also, we have quite big coal deposit that under the development now. In an upcoming decade, we expect huge coal transportation across the Russian Arctic. And also some metal mining now is developing on Novaya Zemlya. So this is just example that we should consider a real big increase in shipping in Russian Arctic. For instance, our biggest shipping company, Sovcomflot, just recently announced that next year they double the volume of their transportation and it will become 12 million tons, only one company. And this is another example of a huge development of shipping in Russia. This is a project that I think you should know. This is Yamal LNG project. This is a joint venture between our private company Novatek, Total from France, and CNPC from China. So this project is now in the final stage of construction. Huge LNG plant already almost done on Yamal Peninsula to liquefy natural gas from on-land deposits and transport it via tankers to the market. In winter time, it will be mostly to Europe, but in summertime, it will be to Asia. And first tanker already arrived in March this year as to test the whole route, and it will be 7 such tankers, and we estimate that the intensity of traffic will be every 45 hours. Tanker in summer could cross the Bering Strait. So for us, it means that risk will increase due to shipping, and one of the most important risks for us as an environmental NGO is the risk of oil spills. Unfortunately, sometimes we have real oil spills in Russia, and the latest one have occurred about 2 years ago in the winter 2015-16 in near our island Sakhalin, when a tanker was crashed and about 400 tons was spilled. And unfortunately, any response wasn't very effective. About 25 kilometers of coastline was polluted. And we just once again see that there is still a lot of gaps in effective technology to clean up and governance. And we produced with our partners quite big report about this accident. We call it lesson learned. Now we sent it to a number of Russian agencies, authorities, with ask them to improve prevention measures, to improve capacity, to clean up, and actually it works well. This report is available in English, and I easily could send it upon request. And actually, that story about poor capacity for oil spill force us for more active collaboration with US partners. First of all, with focus on Bering Straits. We did already a lot of things to support this cooperation in terms of working with my organization here in Washington to support developing area to be avoided in your Bering Strait waters. We support establishing buffer zone in Russian National Park. And definitely now we're more focusing for such concrete tool like implementation as a pilot project, IRMA, as a joint instrument for Russian agencies. Natalia Kutaeva will talk on behalf of this agency later on, and NOAA and Coast Guard. And we hope that even with this difficult time for our cooperation, we can do it, because we still have MOU between these agencies for accidents. We as WWF already did some contribution. Amy mentioned we collected database on biodiversity. We conducted sensitivity mapping projects, and we also even conducted modeling for possible oil spills. And this modeling once again show everybody that if big spill will occur in Bering Strait, transboundary pollution is very possible. So that's another reason for us to be quite active for cooperation here. And last point, just our Russian context, the issue that already discussed day before, I think from Canada, about idea to put ban for heavy fuel oil use in Arctic. For Russia, more realistic to promote alternative, and we think that LNG could be real alternative, at least for Russian Arctic. We just recently, once again, produced our report assessment of options from economic point of view, and it's available now in Russian, but will be available in English soon. But issue that in Russia we have already first LNG plant developed in Yamal Peninsula, but there are a lot of plans to develop similar LNG plants all across the Russian Arctic. And it means that this facility could not also be supplied for LNG for export, but also could be a source for bunkering fuel as LNG. So we think that this is realistic, and we're definitely interested to discuss it on the Arctic-wide area. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I would like to open it quickly for some questions. Amy and Alexey, if you could. So I'll pose a question and you decide who's going to answer. Mm-hmm. I guess this one is for Amy. Can you input ice charts from other ice services? NIC charts? Or this is, do not show stage of development in some cases, ice thicknesses, for example.
If I understood the question, yes, we can take in other ICE products from other ICE services very easily.
Very good. By the way, any questions here from the audience? If not, I'll continue. Okay, so I'm going to ask another one, and then I'll go back to it.
Caitlin is the woman.
Yes.
Who's asking it?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, Caitlin, you can Yeah, you can do it verbally, not online.
You've identified a number of areas of activity in north, mainly connected with the rivers that flow from the south northward. Do you have any information on the prospects for dredging to occur to make those rivers more accessible, and what the damage might be from those dredging activities?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, this is really important and question for us, because exactly in the project of Yamal LNG, there is huge dredging work already occurred in order to tankers to cross the shallow water to reach Sabeta port. And this is really a huge impact for river bay ecosystems. And we do our best at least to force company and government agency who are responsible for that work to minimize impact. We also request them to conduct modeling, because there is threat of penetration of salty water from the northern part of the bay to fresh to the southern part of the bay, where fresh water is the key habitat for fish stock. So yeah, this is really new challenges for us, I can say that.
Thank you. I'm happy to see that IRMA is being used to help close some of those gaps in terms of response capability. There's a question about cost. What is the cost of IRMA? We heard in the last couple of days on the lack of actual infrastructure and equipment in the Arctic, but see a huge investment in many monitoring programs. Second question, do you find some of these monitoring systems duplicate or duplicative efforts for environmental response? So I guess both of you could quickly respond to it.
So the cost of IRMA right now for people to use is free. You know, obviously we have some base money that keeps it going, but we're kind of in an operational, you know, maintenance mode right now. The cost associated with adding more data that's generally what drives up some of the costs. So it just kind of depends on what those data sets are, what shape they're in, how easily they are to ingest. But I have people that can do that fairly quickly depending on the size of the data. The second, overlapping.
Duplicative systems for environmental response?
Kind of get that question quite a bit. It seems like there are definitely lots of mapping portals out there. Some of them are also supporting emergency response. I think that we try to make sure that IRMA is being used as the U.S. government common operational picture, but we try very hard to have interoperability with other systems. So I mentioned quickly some data sets that we ingest from AUS, and they have some other really great products that they've optimized that could be used for spill response. And through those relationships, if there is an event, I think we would ingest those in a way that would make sense from the response point of view. But we have different audiences and missions, so they're both mapping applications, but they're not necessarily duplicative.
Thanks. Alexey, we would like to have a link to your report in our website, so let's talk about that. Yeah. Electronic link.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
sure.
we'll definitely do that. So since it was a tag team, I'm only going to give you one of these. If you have a scissor.
Or we can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.